Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to Ascend Leadership Monthly. This is a webinar series where we explore real world skills and everyday experiences that shape how we lead. So this month we're talking about stillness. This is a skill that rarely shows up on leadership checklists, but it makes all the difference. I wrote an article earlier this year that was inspired by what I saw in high stakes, high pressure environments where we equate speed with productivity. Hint, 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 it was before busy season, right? And in reality, working faster doesn't always mean working better. And so mindfulness is it's not about, like sitting still with your eyes closed, so to speak. It's bringing clarity and intention to the moment. I'm Jana ATM. After a 26 plus year career in public accounting, today I'm a consultant, speaker, and a trainer. And my work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop trainings and workshops focused on the inner work of leadership, like authenticity, intentionality, conscious communication. And mindfulness is at the heart of that inner work. It's especially important when things are moving fast. And I know from experience, I had 17 years in private practice. So I know how hard it can be to try to pause under pressure. It almost feels counterintuitive. But sometimes that's exactly what we need, especially when leadership means calming those swirling waters. My husband went, I don't know why I'm dancing. My husband went on a whitewater rafting trip. And for the record, I've never been. But what I learned from him, it reminded me of that when I was thinking about today's session, that if you're the leader, if you will, on that whitewater rafting ride, whatever, I know for him, it was a little bit more than he expected. And for some of his friends that they went with, it is a lot more than they were ready to handle. And the guide's job, in my mind, is the leadership job around mindfulness. This is about staying steady, right? Because that's what you need to do, or it's what they need you to do, right? It's about being aware so that you can continue to do your job and stay focused, because that's what leaders do, right? So my passion is helping business professionals build deep connections, cultivate safety, and thrive as inclusive, mindful, and trusted leaders. Let me pop over to the Q&A to make sure it's working. Folks, please put your questions in, and Gabe will draw my attention if any time-related questions come up. Otherwise, I'll take as many as I can at the end. So this series is built around the Ascend Leadership Model, which is a framework I created to reframe how we think about leadership. It's not just a list of competencies. To me, it's a mindset. Many leadership programs focus on skills, and we need those skills and techniques, tools, frameworks, and strategies. Absolutely important to do our jobs. But they only go so far, because leadership isn't just about what you do and how you do it. It's how you show up while you are doing it. You can have all the technical expertise in the world. You can know all the best practices, but if you're reactive, if you're unclear, if you're disconnected, people won't follow you. And in today's environment, that's what people need the most from their leaders: presence. And so that's why I define leadership not as a title or a trait, but as an outcome. Peter Drucker said that the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. And so what that does is it shifts the focus away from your resume and toward your impact. And today's session on mindful leadership, it connects mostly to the self-leadership element of my Ascend model. This is really about managing your inner world so you can lead others with clarity and intention. And mindfulness strengthens that inner world. It helps us notice patterns, regulate our emotions, and be responsive and not reactive. There are some other threads here: authenticity, navigation, even connection, when you think about it in terms of mindfulness, because those have to do with staying grounded and helping other people feel safe, feel seen, and feel steady under your leadership. Now, if you've ever seen any of my programs, I like to start with a definition. Merriam-Webster defines mindfulness as the practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, or experiences on a moment-to-moment basis. Now, I might take issue with complete because we never know completely what we're thinking, but here it's really about the goal. At the core of mindfulness, simply noticing what's happening as it's happening. No rush to label it. You're not trying to fix it. You're not trying to explain it. This practice is often used in therapy to help people lower stress, manage anxiety, and interrupt those negative thought loops that we have that sometimes, keep us stuck. I've personally used it to fall asleep. There are strategies for that. I'll share some of those strategies at the end, and I'll give you a hint. For me, that's about breathing and muscle relaxation, right? I've even used it to get rid of those earworms, which are those songs that get stuck in your head and they won't leave. It's a horrible name, earworm. But mindfulness works for that too. In the leadership context, the need for mindfulness becomes even more important, whether your leadership is formal or informal, title, role, influence, energy. Your energy is being pulled in a lot of different directions. And you're responsible as a leader for decisions, for people, for performance, for outcomes, all at once. And we don't get to schedule downtime. The days of the formal lunch break are gone. It doesn't mean you need to not take time for yourself, but sometimes that time is really just the mindfulness break, the mindfulness moment that we can work into our day. We like to believe we're operating with full awareness, making thoughtful, intentional choices all day. But the truth is, up to 95% of what we do is automatic. Habits, reflexes, routines. And this isn't a bad thing. I mean, thankfully, our brain is handling the mundane and the repetitive stuff. That's what frees us up to do this higher analytical thinking that humans do. These are active processes like analyzing, talking, making decisions, doing accounting, if you will. But sometimes we can drift off course or we get lost in thought. That moment when you realize you were daydreaming, right? And you snap out of it and you come back to being here because I wasn't really here, right? That's the moment that we're looking for from a mindfulness perspective, noticing the drift and then shaking it off so we can get back on track. Okay, I'm popping over because I saw something come in. Okay, yeah, these are good. I'm going to answer some of these questions. Okay, thank you all. I'm excited to see questions coming in already. All right, so I want to share this with you. So I saw this article so it was in 2016. So I'm going to say like 2017, shortly after it came out. And I just was fascinated. This was actually in Baltimore and I live in Maryland. So this was just up the road, if you will. And what they did was they created this mindful moment room in this elementary school. So instead of sending kids to the principal's office or detention, they sent them to this room they decorated to be calm with lamps and nice colors and lighting and plush purple pillows, right? Misbehaving kids were asked to sit in the room and go through practices like breathing or meditation. The goal was simply to help them calm down. And then they were also asked to talk through what happened. The results were amazing. Kids actually meditated in silence. Teachers and parents were able to invite the kids to sit down and to simply breathe. They expanded the program into after-school yoga where kids were co-teaching those sessions. And the kids even got involved in the community. One example they gave was building a vegetable garden. And since this article was published in 2016, the program has expanded into cities across the United States, Chicago, Denver, and Buffalo. There's a school, actually, that I think they cited in this article, Patterson High School nearby, suspension rates cut in half, attendance jumped up. There's another school that dropped from 180 suspensions down to 17 suspensions in just a few years from implementing this. So mindfulness is everywhere, and it has such powerful benefits. And in the workplace, it's not just a perk anymore. It's a strategic tool for resilience, clarity, and performance. There are a lot of examples here. I have a couple here on the screen, but the one that really resonated for me was at the Hospital for Special Surgery. I was lucky enough to find a presentation. It was an online presentation that one of the surgeons did, explaining to the rest of the surgical staff, the surgery staff, and other doctors and nurses and administrators the importance of mindfulness and how to weave it in. It is now part of their clinical practice. They use it for pain management, anxiety, stress reduction, especially for patients in recovery after surgery. They offer classes as part of the healing process. This can help patients reconnect their bodies and their emotions in a way that supports physical healing. So this isn't just about thinking, there's a full body connection here. Google's program Search Inside Yourself, this was a well-known corporate mindfulness initiative to the point that it became its own program, if you will. There's a nonprofit that spun off, the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, that has programs around the world focused on cultivating skills like empathy, self-awareness, compassion, resilience. At Aetna, this is a healthcare company, and they took a structured approach to mindfulness. They didn't just offer a few classes, they created a network of mindfulness advocates across the company to train and guide peers, lead sessions, and support this culture of increased awareness. So we are starting to see this everywhere, not just as nice to haves, but in many organizations now, must haves. So I talked about the definition of mindfulness. If it's just noticing, okay, great, we noticed. What are we trying to do here? There's a purpose for this. There's always something happening. What are you feeling? What's going on in your body? What's happening around you? Most of the time, we don't even pause long enough to ask that question. We're just responding, we're reacting, we're just doing stuff. So mindfulness helps create that simple awareness. This isn't complicated. There are not a lot of moving parts here. This is observation without assigning any meaning or blame. That will come later. Wait, that sounded horrible. The blame, I don't say the blame will come later. We will be able to think about meaning and intention, but first we have to recognize that moment and see what's happening. So there's something happening, right? We notice it. The next step is to interrupt that autopilot, that 95% of automatic that is happening, because some of the automatic that's happening might be thoughts and behaviors driving the way we show up day to day, but we're not realizing we're showing up like that. And we all have these. These are routines. These are shortcuts. Sometimes they're knee-jerk reactions. And autopilot is great in that it keeps everything moving, but sometimes autopilot isn't so good because it keeps everything moving in a moment when we should be stopping and addressing what's happening internally so that it can affect the way we're showing up externally. When we stay stuck in this autopilot for too long, we can start drifting away, that daydreaming that I said earlier, or we can get distracted. Oh, something just went wrong. And next thing you know, we're spiraling down in this thought spiral of negative thought spiral. Maybe that's the way I should say it. This brings us to the third one, creating space. When we interrupt that automaticness, I don't think that's a word, but when we interrupt the automaticness, right, we can create space to choose how we're going to show up. That is the teeny tiny space. I'm going to say this over again, teeny tiny space, right? That's where intentionality lives. We've all had those moments when we said something or thought something after the fact, right? Later, you thought, that's not who I am. I was at an event recently, and I was telling people that as I've developed more of this self-awareness, I look back and I'm almost retroactively embarrassed, or, some of that regret about that's not who I am, because I wasn't paying attention. Or we've been in those moments where we said, that's not what I meant. That wasn't my intention, like right there. And a lot of the reason why that happens is because it's almost always reactivity, defensiveness, or could just be we're depleted, we are tired, we're not feeling well. Mindfulness helps us catch those moments before we do or say the thing that leads to that wasn't what I meant. So I want to walk through these one by one. I'm going to take a quick peek. Somebody said, Karen shared that my therapist calls it monkey mind. It just takes over and uses your energy. Okay, I'm not sure how I feel about monkey mind, but, and I do want to, it reminded me, I do want to clarify this from ADHD, because some of this might sound like trying to rein in my attention. This isn't about reining in my attention. It's about paying attention to what's happening in a moment. So there is a difference. And with mindfulness, it can be particularly helpful for somebody like me with ADHD. I wouldn't call them monkey mind. I would say for me, it's shiny things, like things are happening all the time that get me distracted. This isn't a negative spiral. It's just taking me off track or distracting me from the decision that I need to make right now. So the first step is simply noticing what's happening. I mentioned that as it's happening. So this means being grounded in the present moment and not the story we're telling ourselves about it. Just observing, trying as much as possible to be impartial. So we're not giving it meaning so that we don't jump to conclusions. Now, mindfulness at this level is just building awareness, not just of our internal state, but what's happening around us. So it's internal and external awareness side by side, if you will. And this isn't always easy because especially when we're emotionally activated, right? Think about a time you were in a meeting and someone interrupted you. Let's up the stakes. The person who interrupted you, you kind of feel like they're often, I don't know, irritating or grating. Maybe you don't get along with them. Maybe you don't like the way they do things. So they interrupt. And what do you notice? Let's just stay on the notice piece for a minute. Your jaw tightens up, your back stiffens. I know for me, when I get defensive, my back tightens up. You get a flush of heat in your face, or you just stop listening because now you're already trying to come up with your comeback. Or you're tapping your pen, you're folding your arms, and you're just looking away, right? It's noticing that you're doing those things. These are the little signals and the cues that tell you you're having a reaction. If you learn to scan for this, you'll start to notice in real time that that's happening, and then you have a chance of doing something about it. And I think I'm saying this. I've said this. I hope I haven't said this yet already. The all you have to do is ... I don't want to come across that way, that because they call mindfulness a practice for a reason. I don't want to make it dismissive that says, all you have to do is pay attention. This isn't easy. It takes practice. And this is a journey that you only do it a little bit better, and then a little bit better, and a little bit better. And that's all you can try to do. So if step one is notice, let's go back to that meeting. You notice that clenched jaw, right? That you actually aren't listening anymore. You're just waiting for them to stop talking so that you can start. That is an autopilot reaction you're having. So how do we interrupt that autopilot? This is important because if we don't, the next thing you say or the next thing you do might mean 3 things later. You're like, that's not what I said. That's not what I meant. So we want to get in there and change, I should say, interrupt what would have just automatically tumbled out so that what comes out is purposeful. It's meaningful. It's intentional. If we can notice the activation, this is where we can pause. The teeny tiny pause, right? The goal is to just interrupt that chain reaction. Somebody says something, I react, I do. We want to interrupt that. So noticing is great, but if we can't move into this next step, we risk falling right back into our old habits. So the interrupting thing, what happens? You notice it, the clenched jaw, right? So you take a deep breath, you feel yourself, you pull back to protect your idea, right? So you intentionally and physically, like you soften your shoulders. You literally do that. You force your shoulders to relax. And you pause and ask yourself, like, what is it that I wanted to say? Do I really have to say it right now? Park it, and then bring your attention back so that you're actually listening to what is being said. Tiny shifts, teeny tiny changes. Each one slows your reaction down just enough to create that space to respond, not react. Those are the key words here. Being responsive and being reactive. Being reactive, you're not really thinking it through. Being responsive, you are moving forward in an intentional way. And this is practice. We're not trying to fix everything. We're just trying to interrupt or disrupt a pattern. And then the last step, great. We noticed we were interrupted. We took a moment to quiet that internal noise, that teeny tiny pause I'm talking about. What's next? Well, we've created a bit of space. Now what do we do with it? Right? We practice and practice the teeny tiny space. We practice and practice and practice. Then we have to choose what we're going to do that we can align what we say, what we do, how we behave, the decisions we make with our values, that we can be empathetic, that we can be open and curious. It's easy to assume that good intention automatically leads to good output or impact, but that's not always true, right? When I say that's not what I meant, well, I think that phrase actually speaks for itself. That wasn't my intention, right? We've all had those moments where what we said misses the mark. And that's because emotions, when they're high, they can be emotional dysregulation. And so our response might be disproportional to the stimulus. So by quieting things down, it gives our nervous system a chance to catch up so we don't end up being reactive. And I'm not trying to excuse bad behavior here. What I want us to think about is to soften around the edges of how we respond. There's this really interesting study that asks people to, bear with me now, put a pencil in their mouth, right? And then use their muscles to mimic the movement of a smile. Now, what the participants didn't know that this was part of an experiment, but afterwards they reported feeling happier. Just the movement of their muscles created a small shift in their mood. So we think we smile because we feel good, but that data told us that sometimes smiling is why we feel better, right? Okay, maybe not right. I hope that made sense. But so what we're talking about here is mindfulness. Now let's talk about why. Before we wrap up, I'll give you a couple of examples of how. So when it comes to decision making as leaders, what the data tells us is if you regularly practice mindfulness, those leaders tend to make better decisions, not just in terms of outcomes, but in how those decisions are made. They're more thoughtful, they're more intentional, they're more aligned with values like empathy, transparency, and fairness. And that's because of the slowing down that mindfulness offers us to create that space where we can open up our field of view. We can start to think about other options. We reduce impulsivity, and we can even notice when bias is creeping into our decision making. And then we strengthen that inner awareness so we're not constantly reacting to the noise around us. I like this quote from Barsade. I hope I said that right. And this challenges the old school advice that we should stop being emotional when we make decisions. And the truth is, we're always having emotions. The question is to not be carried away by them, right? They're part of how we process. They're part of how we assess risk. They're part of how we protect ourselves. They help us give things meaning. So to say just be objective, it kind of ignores the human side of decision making. She actually co-authored a study that found that even 15 minutes of focused breathing led to better decision making by participants. It was fascinating. So the data is there that tells us when we can slow down, we sometimes can do better. I actually wrote an article, I think I mentioned it earlier, slowing down to speed up feels counterintuitive, but those little teeny tiny pauses actually can help us move faster. Just popped into my mind. You know, it's kind of like when you are trying to follow navigation and you feel like, do I have the right place? Am I heading in the wrong direction? If you were to pull over and just validate your directions, you're going to get there probably faster than if you find yourself, well, maybe this way, maybe it's that way, and you've gone off course and gone a lot of different directions before you were able to get yourself back on track. Maybe that's a better example. So what happens under autopilot? Because familiarity is our brain's favorite shortcut. We do what we know, and not necessarily because it's the best option. It feels efficient, right? Brushing your teeth. This is a great habit, but not so great if you need to do something more nuanced. So when it comes to decision making, we fall into a few of these, I'll call these trap routines that mindfulness can help us break out. So the first one is the trap of familiarity. You know, it's worked before, let's just do it again. Not necessarily a bad thing. The challenge is when we lean on these familiar options, we might be avoiding uncertainty. And this isn't because we thought through the situation. And familiarity feels safe, but if we're not careful, the wash, rinse, repeat decisions might not be serving us. The reflex trap. This is where pressure, looming deadline. I'm thinking back to my days in tax season, right? A high stakes moment. Instinct tells us act fast. Urgency makes us want to just do it and get rid of the discomfort, right? But that knee-jerk reaction I said earlier, we might choose something and it's not necessarily the right thing, even though it took the pressure off. For now, maybe. And then the speed trap. That's the one I have down here at the bottom called stillness feels unproductive. This is tough because in work culture, often we value speed and consider that to be taking action. But stillness can feel like you're doing nothing but wasting your time. But remember, slowing down isn't inaction. It's space. It's presence. It's giving us a chance to actually think instead of simply react. How does reactivity look like for you? So when you're thinking about going into autopilot, and one of the ways to start to develop this kind of awareness is to understand what reactivity looks like for you. It's not always obvious, and the same thing won't always get the same response. So that you're cut off in a meeting, one day you don't pay attention. It's a little annoying, but it doesn't stop you in your tracks. But then the next meeting, you're under pressure. It's very high stakes. And the person who did it is a person who gets on your nerves, right? And in that moment, it can spark stress and frustration and activate a bunch of emotions that are going to derail you. So that's why it's important to recognize your own stress signature, if you will. It's the mix of physical, emotional, and behavioral cues that signal when you are being reactive, when you are under strain, right? When some of your resilience might be, is the word cracking, weakening? For some people, it's physical. For some, it's behavioral. For some, it's mental. And for some, it's emotional. These are not problems to be fixed. These are signals to notice. Early warning signs that your nervous system has been activated. And so now we can start to think about, I need to watch for some of those moments so that I can step in and pause, right? And be intentional. So what are those moments? Recognizing the spark I have here. I thought about what are all the things that can set you off, so to speak. This is different for everyone. So this is just a couple of ideas. These are the little moments that you might look back and realize tend to trigger you, if you will. And many of these are very subtle. They don't always seem like it's a big deal. And yet your body is reacting anyway. One of the interesting things about mindfulness is if when you start to notice what reactivity looks like in your body, and then you start to just try to notice when that reactivity is happening. Pick one thing, for example, when your shoulders are tight. This is something I've tried to do personally, is that every now and again, I will simply just stop and pay attention to my shoulders, and they're literally like this, and then I let them go. And I'm like, oh, okay, I did it. And then I look up, and somehow they're back like this again. Like, how does this happen? I'm still doing that today. Like I might even do it while we're doing in this program because it is an automatic response. Now, it's not necessarily tied to a stress reaction, but if it is, it's good to know. And it's good to have practiced scanning for this, because if I scan for it, then when I notice it, it's just a cue that tells me, hey, pay attention, you might be being reactive. Could it be something like you feel like you've been dismissed? That's one of your triggers. Or could it be when there's no context, maybe there's some innuendo or some suggestion that starts to feel like somebody's poking at you and it doesn't feel good, right? When we can recognize that spark, we can create that critical pause. We can name what's happening, not overanalyze it. Remember, we don't want to slip into judgment. We are not trying to fix what's happening. All we want to do by being mindful is to minimize the reactivity, quiet the reactivity, so that we don't say something or do something we'll regret, say something or do something that is not aligned with our values, say something or do something that might be hurtful or have an unintended impact. One of the challenges with intention is that we think having a good one is all that matters, right? At the end of the day, though, if you hurt somebody, if you make a poor decision, it doesn't really matter what your intention is. What we now have to deal with is the impact. Can you imagine if we were able to just slow things down enough to avoid this unintended impact, to align our actions and our behaviors and express them in such a way that we avoid this intention impact gap? It's not completely avoidable, but there are a lot of times when reactivity, if we can quiet it, takes that situation from happening. So, what do I mean here? These are just a couple of examples. So the pattern on the left, the behavior that can be a bit reactive. On the right, what do we mean in terms of being responsive? So you notice something, rather than trying to fix it, we might pause. For example, in that pause, we might notice what our reactivity signals are. Just noticing it. For me, I'm telling you, my go-to is the tightening in my back when I'm being defensive. I didn't necessarily know when I was being defensive. I actually found it difficult to identify that feeling, that reactivity in terms of feeling. But when I finally understood that that sensation in my back was 9 times out of 10 a reflection of defensiveness in terms of my reactivity, I've learned to trust that. I have learned that when I feel that, I know I'm being defensive. And then when I do that, I often will find myself quietly just taking a breath or 2 or 3. Actually, the magic number is 3 deep breaths where your exhale is a little bit longer than your inhale, right? To slow down that nervous system and to kind of check back in. So pausing, not to fix. Being curious about something new. If you find yourself going to the same thing, you can say, wait, hold on. Is there another thing here to consider? Like, right, mindfulness isn't about removing emotions. It's about thinking about data, even emotion as data. And then if we stay regulated instead of dysregulated, we can identify the emotion we're having, identify the emotion that is appropriate for the situation, express ourselves in a way that doesn't show us being emotional in the sense that we're being carried away or unregulated. So there are a lot of reasons that mindfulness can help us shift out of this reactivity, if you will, and move into the space of intention. All right, I want to pause because I've seen quite a few things coming in and I want to make sure I'm not missing something. So Jane asked if there are recommendations for fixing emotionally charged reactions that have already occurred. So some of that might be a reflection practice where if you've realized after the fact, let's say it's afternoon and I realize now that I was being reactive and was having an emotional response to a meeting this morning or situation this morning, some of the practice might be sitting quietly and trying to notice what happened, what was the trigger, what did it look like in terms of your responsiveness, so you can start to create a memory to attach to, if you will, so that you can notice it faster and faster. It's just one idea that came to mind. It could also be that in the meeting, you just got interrupted, you realize you were being reactive, and then when you realize it, you take a breath and you check back in. There's no right or wrong answer. The challenge really is what works for you to quiet I'm putting my hand on my heart. You can't see it, but I'm thinking, quiet your heart. This is as much as important as quiet your mind. Somebody suggested a book. They said it's called Mindful, F-U-L-L. So mindful to mindful. All right. Mind, M-I-N-D-F-U-L-L to mindful, as in mindfulness. I hope that's clear. One of the greatest takeaways they read was to leave space between the stimulus and the response. Absolutely. The hardest thing to do is the teeny tiny space that I'm talking about. Somebody said there's a YouTube video called The Square Root of 1% Meditation Experiment. Oh, thank you. Writing that down. Sorry, people. Square root. I don't think I get to keep these. I don't think I can get back to the Q&A afterwards. Okay. Hey, Gabe, do you know how to mark the ones that I've addressed answered so I don't keep coming back to them?
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that for you, Shana. I will do that right now.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much. I
Of
love Gabe.
course.
I love CPA Academy moderators. Aren't they wonderful? Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about decision making because you can break it down into 4 basic steps. First, framing the decision. Second, gathering information. Third, you reach a conclusion, as in, make the decision. And then fourth, gather feedback. So I've touched on different elements of all of these points. So I just want to highlight those points from a mindfulness perspective to the decision-making process. So I don't want to spend a ton of time here because I'm looking at the clock. I want to make sure I have time. So framing the decision. This is noticing when a decision actually needs to be made and resisting the urge to slide into autopilot. That mindfulness pause is when we ask, what really is the decision here? And why do I need to make it now? Sometimes we might have made a decision and just kept right on going and not realize that we had an intersection and just blew past it and didn't realize that we could have made a right turn or a left turn instead of going straight. This doesn't mean we're going to catch it, but what if we've gone past that moment and realized, hold on, let me pull it back and let me think about this and be thoughtful about the direction we're going to go. So mindfulness can help you do that. But in terms of making the decision, this is really gives us that moment of clarity so that we make sure we're not defaulting into that, well, we've always done it this way, and you never really thought about it, right? So we can also recognize in this moment, are there ethical considerations that we don't usually surface when things are moving really fast? So what's really important here in terms of mindfulness and framing the decision is it helps us stay grounded and we can experience emotion, but not being emotional as we try to consider the decision we need to make. Now, listen, not all decisions require this heightened level of mindfulness, but sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, we're stressed, we're tired, we're hungry, we're feeling a lot of pressure. Maybe this is the first high stakes decision I've had to make in my leadership role. These are the most important times and moments when it helps to slow down enough just to make sure we are looking at everything, all the considerations that need to be pulled into the decision itself. Now, what information are we gathering? Are we staying curious rather than rushing to conclusions? Research shows that people who are more mindful are also more aware of their ethical principles. So that's how they make those decisions that are more aligned to their values. Mindfulness also helps us tolerate ambiguity. Remember, I said that stillness is often seen as inaction. Ambiguity can sometimes feel the same way. And so holding space for uncertainty takes practice rather than forcing a quick answer, right? The mindset of mindfulness helps us slow down and sort through what is actually useful and find what might be missing. Then there's coming to the conclusion. Well, mindfulness helps us notice when our head is saying one thing and our gut is saying another, right? We're torn in different directions. And so what mindfulness will help us to do is not just be reactive. Some of that discomfort that I'm talking about, mindfulness will allow us to sit with it and have it not drive our behavior. And sometimes you might find that noticing the discomfort makes you realize, wow, there are a couple more things I might want to consider here that I was in fact being reactive. Let me go back and reevaluate, right? This awareness makes it easier to look for missing things, weigh competing priorities, and not get stuck in this pull to just get it over with, just make it go away, right? Because the pressure or the timeline of the deadline can feel like it's pushing you to make a fast response. Sometimes, right, slow pulling over and double checking those directions will ultimately get you to your destination faster than just spinning because you're rushing. You just want to hurry up and do it. The last one is learning from feedback. And this is the one we usually skip, not because we don't care, but because the next thing, the next deadline, the next meeting, that decision is already waiting. Can't even speak. You're so tired. You just finished that one. Like, I just need a break, right? There are all kinds of things that happen. And what we find, maybe I'm speaking from personal issues, but we don't always circle back, right? It's harder when the outcome was messy and the feedback is tough to hear. It's hard to go back and face something you feel like you did wrong. It's very uncomfortable. And it's easy to think, well, I won't do that again, or I won't make that mistake again. And then we move on. But that vague kind of reflection, number one, it doesn't translate to or lead to growth. And number two, it doesn't mean we're not going to do it again. We're not going to make the mistake again, because the same mistake might show up in different forms. So until we understand what's underlying us making those kinds of mistakes, if we don't go back and reflect, we are at higher likelihood that that's a pattern that will continue. That pattern might actually get rooted in and become more of a pattern that's harder to disrupt later. So what mindfulness does is it helps us approach feedback with less ego, with more presence. It helps us to notice when we are shutting down or getting defensive, right? That's what I was talking about for me. And gives us that space to stay open just long enough to learn something, right? And that kind of learning is where we strengthen our decision-making over time. It's not just doing more, but it's understanding better. And reflection is what makes us better decision makers. Now, I want to say a quick word about resilience, because there is a direct connection between resilience and mindfulness and our ability to bounce back, which is resilience, our ability to stay steady and move forward when things get tough. Now, call myself creative here. I always like to create graphics. You've probably seen them in some of my other sessions. And in this one, it's designed as a flow. So it starts with mindfulness. I don't know if I'm going to do the right direction on the screen, so I won't. It starts with mindfulness, moves into emotional regulation, self-awareness, presence, and resilience. So why does this go this way? Well, mindfulness helps us regulate those emotions, not by suppressing them, but by noticing and then managing how they show up. That emotional regulation then helps us develop self-awareness and some steadiness, if you will. And when we are more self-aware and we can create that steadiness, we can stay present and grounded. And when we stay present, we are more likely to respond, not just react, and this builds our resilience over time. Now, so I put resilience and mindfulness next to each other, but it's not intended to be the end of a cycle. That's why I kind of wanted them side by side. Listen, look, I'm an accountant, not a designer, but this was intentional. So no judgments and comments about my graphic design skills, all right? The part that I really love here is that resilience that helps us to know things and notice things better. This is a loop, right? It keeps going. Mindfulness supports resilience. Resilience makes mindfulness accessible even in difficult moments. Now, today's session isn't about resilience. I actually have an entire program on that, but I thought it deserved an honorable mention because one of the superpowers that mindfulness will bring us is exactly that. The ability to stay steady in the face of difficulty, stress, pressure. Now, what happens when we're not grounded? Well, we lose the capacity to pause and we slip into autopilot. Reactivity creeps in. We're short with people. We start snapping at people. We shut down. We stop listening. We move quickly, not necessarily in the right direction. So it's not clarity then that's driving us. It's pressure. So that's why resilience is important, that without it, our decision-making falls apart. Now, we often confuse resilience with toughness. Buck it up, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. Real resilience isn't about being unaffected. It's about being intentional about how we respond. And that's why there's such a clear tie between resilience and mindfulness. It's not pretending we're fine. It's not pushing through at all costs. It's being aware of what's happening so we can stay connected to our values and choosing how we move forward from that place of clarity. I keep using the term teeny tiny because not only are these moments that I'm talking about small, they're everywhere. So I was thinking about this earlier today as I was preparing, and it reminded me of going to the beach, right? Think about a teeny tiny moment as a grain of sand. It doesn't feel like much, right? You go to the beach, but then next thing you know, you're covered in sand. It's in your bag, it's on your shoes, it's in your food, right? It sticks to your skin. And then sometimes sand gets in places it's not supposed to be, right? I'll just leave that one there. And somehow you get home from your trip and you find more, like hours later, days later, it's still there. Those grains of sand are like little micro decisions that we're making all the time. The ones that seem so small, we barely notice them, but they can accumulate and stick. Practicing mindfulness helps us to be more present in those moments. And I'm not suggesting every decision needs to be big or you need to constantly have these reflective pauses, but sometimes there are moments when we shouldn't be moving through quickly because everything is not fine. And the key is developing that practice of noticing. Remember, I was talking about my shoulders are doing it now. Remember, I was talking about the shoulders? Just the practice for me of, hey, what are my shoulders doing? That's what I'm talking about. Practice. Practice. That's why they call mindfulness a practice. All right, one last point before I start sharing with you a couple of ideas on how to do this. Because at the end of the day, mindfulness and leadership comes down to noticing those pauses. I call those pauses the clarity gap. And that's the space between the stimulus and the response. It's the moment you catch yourself right before you do the next thing. So this can break you out of instinct and into intention. So that moment is the moment, that's the magic moment when we have a shot at doing something intentionally. All right, I have maybe 7 minutes left? If I could do math, I can't do math. So what do I want to share here? You can do this anywhere, all the time. I have pictures of here working out. Somebody's walking through the hall. Somebody's having a meeting. Somebody's going for a run. Somebody's waiting for the train, walking the dog. Okay, I'll stop. But the point of mindfulness is all you need is a few moments. Sometimes it's just a matter of taking breaths. And if you hear nothing else today, start with notice. This phrase has become a mantra. It's a game changer for me. I tried this idea of noticing when I was exhibiting a particular behavior that I've been struggling with for years. And what I learned about it is that this was just like not just noticing the behavior, but I started to notice my patterns, my reactivity style. And I'm still in progress, right? The more you notice you need to notice. So if it's the only thing you think about is the beginning of your mindful practice, this is where you start. What's the one thing you want to notice? Here's a question to think about. Stop and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? It seems simple, but it's often surprisingly hard to answer. It's because we're not used to checking in with ourselves. We move so fast, we don't even think. So here are a couple things to notice. For example, you might notice the sounds nearby, the hum of the air conditioning, the texture of your chair, the humidity in my room, because our air conditioning is broken right now. Can I just tell you, it's very humid. I'm surprised my hair hasn't turned into an afro. I digress. It could be a sound that I hear often in my office, which is my dog snoring, right? Like sometimes I pay attention and sometimes I don't. But it's just noticing that. So asking yourself, what's happening right now? It's surprising because it snaps you right back to the present moment. It brings you back from wherever you were. There's a practice called getting centered and getting grounded. These terms are often used interchangeably. I define getting centered as taking a moment to realign yourself with your values, your sense of self, your sense of purpose. What is it that you're how do you want to show up? And then checking in if you're showing up that way. Getting grounded, I refer to that as that bring me back to the moment. It's recognizing your space in the physical world right now. So it's awareness of your body, your connection to the earth, your connection to the surroundings, like the feeling of the texture of your chair right now. That's an example of getting grounded. So those two techniques are something you can use, just pausing in the moment and going through those different reflections. Now, there are a lot of different practices for mindfulness. It doesn't have to be, sitting, that picture that we all see somebody meditating. I actually, when I meditate, I don't assume that position at all. Often I'm sitting in a chair facing the window with my hands resting quietly in my lap. But that's what works for me. Whatever works for you. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's a simple, though, everyday practice to slow us down and pay attention. So meditation, movement, that could even be dancing to music, right? To break up the rhythm. Let me stop. Body scan. So when I used to go to sleep, I start at the bottom of my feet and I notice my toes, and then I notice the arches of my feet and then my heels, and I just slowly scan up my body. And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, I'm asleep before I get to my shoulders. It works, right? But there are a lot of different things you can try. Now, before I walk through the examples, I'm going to jump. Please download the handout if you haven't already, because I have this section at the back. There's some websites here that you can go to that just generally provide information. There are some tools and resources that you can look to. Somebody mentioned a YouTube video. Well, I also have a couple of videos. There are videos that can teach you how to do yoga. There are mindfulness apps that you can use to walk you through lots of different types of mindfulness practices. I used to use Calm. Today I use Insight Timer. The very first app I ever used was Headspace. There's this great YouTube video on how to meditate. I've embedded the link in the PDF. So if you click on that page on the PDF, it should jump you out to this video, but otherwise you have the URL here. And then what I've also included in, because I realize the time I want to take questions, I've included some real life examples. So breathing technique. When might you do it? What does it look like? So at the top half of the box is what is the situation? And the bottom box, half of the box is how do you actually do it? So let's just look at this, just this one. Your racing thoughts, your anxiety about a meeting that's coming up, you're overwhelmed by your to-do list, whatever the case may be. So what do? You silence your phone. You can do it, I promise you. Turn off all notifications, turn down the lights, then you lower your gaze, or maybe you can close your eyes, and then you breathe in to the count of 4. Hold to the count of 4. Exhale to the count of 4. And hold again for the count of 4. And then you repeat this. Maybe set a minute and repeat it. This will help calm your nervous system. Then that was 1 minute. That's all it took you, was a minute, and you might find yourself calmer after that. So those are examples of little things that you can do as you start to develop mindfulness habits. All right, I think I have a few minutes left for questions. Let's see. Let me go to the order that they came in. If I can read it. All right, what do you do if you know someone who says to you, settle down when you are upset or making a point? This just upsets me. Oh, that's a good one. That's an example of an activating thing. It could be that feels dismissive. Maybe I'm trying to think, what would I do in that situation? Because like I said, there's no right or wrong. What I found for me, because this is an example of when I get defensive, I might come up with a phrase. Having a go-to phrase or a pause phrase is a really good idea to have, by the way. Maybe the pause phrase for this is, I just need a moment. I'm good. I just need a minute. And then take your minute, right? Recommendations for fixing emotionally charged reactions that have already occurred. Oh, I answered that one. Thank you. Being curious allows you to slow down and think of other people's perspectives or feelings. The power of curiosity, cannot tell you. I talk about this a lot in some different programs. When you are curious, it opens you up to try to figure something out. And when you're trying to figure something out, your brain will naturally set aside judgment, because you can't judge something if you're still trying to figure it out. Curiosity is a powerful thing. Maybe it's not just the decision. How you communicate the decision matters too. Absolutely. The beauty of mindfulness is if we can catch that moment when we were about to blurt, or in my case, say something that is effectively the equivalent of poking somebody in the eye, because I can be good at that. All right, Gabe, I got to give you back a minute. So before we go, I want to invite you to continue the journey with how you're going to phrase it, and not just words. Remember, all about empowering your team. Most of our communication is nonverbal. How do we? People only hear about 7% of what you say. So now the registration isn't open yet. Facial expressions, so if you want to get a notification for when body posture, all of these things, is I got to get to being present on that one, right? You can sign up for a notification on the website. Do you have apps you can recommend? I already did that. For the remainder of the year. I'm so proud. They're in the tools and handouts. How about podcasts? Ooh. The best podcast that I listened to today is called Hidden Brain, although that has nothing to do with mindfulness, but it's a great podcast. I had some podcasts, but I stopped listening to them because I started to go only to those apps. Most of those apps today have things like stories, narratives, and in Insight Timer that I'm taking now, they have courses that you can take to walk you through different either skills or strategies or practices. That they're fantastic. Let's see. It is such a struggle to shut off my mind from thinking about work. If I build clients too much, I spend time worrying about it. And you know what I found? Sometimes I've actually said to the client, explain them the fee or offered a discount later because I felt like maybe that fee was too much. And I actually had one client one time who said, "You are worth every penny." And I realized that was all narrative in my head. So thank you actually for bringing that up. That was a powerful moment that I still haven't forgotten. And if you want to learn more about other programs I offer, you can scan the QR code, send me a message on LinkedIn, email me. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, thank you again for being here. And I hope to see you next time.